They need to know what they're getting into. Yeah. But we're going to wrap up this odd class and then on Nehemiah. And then, Jerry, are you teaching next week in here? Yes, Jerry will have it in this class next week. Good to see so many of you back in here, and looking forward to having people online. So come on in, folks, and make your way in this mad month of March. We've got some of our younger people will be joining us. Some of the youth group have gone for their junior-senior trip. This is the first time we've been able to do anything like that with the youth group, to travel. It's pretty impressive, and things are getting better every day. I want to thank all my tech team for just doing an outstanding job. You guys continue to amaze me. And I'll also give you a preview. Next Sunday, we will bring it out in here. But we're going to do some things starting next Sunday to go from March 28th to April 4, which is Easter Sunday, to give you and your families, and even with folks online, a way to grow spiritually during that week. And we're going to do some studies. It's kind of one of the last social distanced activity things that we may be doing for a while, but it connects us all spiritually rather than just spatially. And I'll tell you more about that this week. And we're at time, and we're getting ready to start our odd class on the return to the promised land. This is our last. Yeah, there we go. Hey, there we go. I'm in control now. I control the vertical, and I control the horizontal. That's an old sci-fi reference. Okay. Email in the answer if you know what that was, and you'll get a dime. Okay. I want to finish this up in Nehemiah. It's the last half of Nehemiah. I really think that in Nehemiah, my experience at least has been that I never got past the reading of the law. Ezra gets up, reads the law. Nehemiah tells everybody not to get upset, not to get sad, and then you don't really hear from Nehemiah again. People lose interest. It's kind of like what I did last week. You do the first half of Nehemiah, you leave the second half, and you never get around to it. Well, we're not going to do that here. So, I want to pick up in Nehemiah 7, and remember that he has had all of the builders and the workers in Jerusalem rebuild these walls. They do it in 52 days, and they start at the gates, and they go around. If you're looking down on Jerusalem like a clock face, they go around counterclockwise, and he lists off who's building what. And so they're all responsible for building different gates and sections of the wall, and this is going to fortify the city so that they'll be safe from invaders. Here is Nehemiah 7 as they're getting to the completion of that project, or the wall is completed, and I will mention this just as background. There's a little bit of opposition going on because the neighboring groups, the neighboring nations around Judah, they don't like the emergence of Judah. They want that land for themselves. And they oppose it, and the way they oppose it quite often is not through violence, but the governors of those other districts send word back up through the chain of command opposing it. So, for example, in 6:16, you say, when our enemies heard about all this, all the surrounding nations were afraid. They lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Era, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds, and then telling him what I said, and Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. All right, this is the Ammonite nation, which is next door across the Jordan River for them. All of these letters go back and forth. You go back to Ezra and you can see an example of some of these letters that were sent to the Persian king to create a work stoppage on the wall building project in Judah. Now Tobiah sees that God favors Judah, so he needs to strengthen his connections to Judah. All of these groups are related, and here in chapter 6, he's the son-in-law of Shechaniah, who was the son of Johanan, who had married the daughter of Meshullam. So Tobiah is connected through family ties, through marital ties with the people in Judah. Remember that, because that will come up later. Okay, so in Nehemiah 7, when the wall had been rebuilt, and I had positioned the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I then put in charge over Jerusalem my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the chief of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem must not be opened in the early morning until those who are standing guard close the doors and lock them. Position residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at the guard stations and some near their homes. Now the city was spread out and large, and there were not a lot of people in it, and at that time houses had not been rebuilt. My God placed it on my heart to gather the leaders, the officials, and the ordinary people so that they could be enrolled on the basis of genealogy. Here's our situation now going into this. This would be like the level 4 in the video game, and our task now is we've got our city built, okay? It's kind of like Minecraft, all right? If you don't know what Minecraft is, you ought to figure this out. But you build all these things on Minecraft, and people during the pandemic have been building. It's like online Legos is what it is, but you can just keep going because you get a limitless supply of Legos. But there's just one thing. Let me check with my experts up there. You can't really populate Minecraft, can you? I mean, there's no people. You can't put people in there. I mean, it's not like Sim City or something where you have all these little virtual people running around or whatever it is, or Final Fantasy, and you got all. So you have Minecraft, you have all these buildings, but nobody's there. Now if you can, and I'm wrong on that, I'm old and I really don't play Minecraft, so I'm just talking about something I don't know. And this is what they have. They have this built. They have the walls built. But no one lives there. What good is a city if you don't have people contributing to the economy? They need people in that city so that it will run, and so that it will thrive, and so that it will be the city of David, so that it will be the city on a hill. All right? It'll be the example to the world that God intended it to be. So Nehemiah has a plan. He wants to gather the people, and he wants them there, but he wants them to be Judeans, because if not, then the influence of the other religions will come into this. They need to be committed to the project of restoring and rebuilding the people of Judah, just like he is committed to that. So they have to go through a genealogy here. This isn't hate and racism. This is just, hey, look, we got to do this right, and then we can start dealing with those who are around us. So you get those people together. There's a table there where he tells you who he brought in, a little bit of Persian bookkeeping there. Remember, Nehemiah is influenced by the Persian culture. He was the cupbearer to the king. He tells you all the folks that came in so that you can know that they really are, genealogically, they are these Judeans who belong there. This is going to, by the way, also increase their claim over them being the children of Abraham versus the Samaritans in the north who can't quite show this same lineage. That becomes an issue between these two nations. In chapter 8, this is where we get to the point of the reading of the law. When the 7th month arrived and the Israelites were settled in their towns, the people gathered together in the plaza, which was in front of the water gate. And they asked Ezra, the scribe, to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, which included men and women and all those able to understand what they heard. This happened on the first day of the 7th month. So he read it before the plaza in front of the water gate from dawn till noon before the men and women and those children who could understand. All the people were eager to hear the book of the law. This is the first time we see Nehemiah and Ezra together. This is the first time that they come together in the same place. We see that Ezra's work has overlapped Nehemiah's work. Now, they are separated in generation. Ezra seems to be the older one. Nehemiah comes along, years later after Ezra had already come over with his group to establish people back in the land. Ezra is bringing back captives who were in Babylon. Nehemiah brings a group from Susa, the Persian capital. Here they're getting everybody together, and the significance of the 7th month that has come up. The 7th month in the Hebrew calendar is the month of Tishrei. That corresponds to our month of September, October. One of the reasons I know that is because when I was in college, I had a Jewish professor, and he would always let us know that he would be gone during the high holy days, which was usually September, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which was always great because in a way, he would be gone. He would say, come in and work on your projects. We would do that, but we didn't have to work for very long on it. So in a way, I benefited from the Jewish holidays because I got them off too because I didn't have to go to that class when he wasn't there. I wasn't a good observer of the holidays, but I benefited from it, and I got a skip out of those classes, so I always made sure that I understood when those would fall on the calendar, and it's usually September, so I've never forgotten that. Now, Rosh Hashanah is the new year. Why would you have your new year in the 7th month? It's because you have the same months, but you have different calendars. This shouldn't be hard for us to understand. We do it. We have fiscal years that start on October 1st, the 10th month. I guess you'd call it our civil calendar, or our common calendar starts on January 1, the first month. They did the same thing. They had a religious year, and they had a civil year. The first day of the 7th month begins this religious observance. And then there are festivals that come in. You've got Rosh Hashanah, you've got the Day of Atonement 10 days later. Then you have the Festival of the Booths, where they all live in tents. It's also known as Sukkoth. And all of this happens in the 7th month. 7th month is an important holiday time for these people. But remember, these folks here don't necessarily know that. Nehemiah knows that. Ezra knows that. The people who understand, the Levites, they know that. So they're gathering them at the right time. The place where they're gathering them, called the Water Gate, there's probably a lot of significance to that I'm not going to cover right now. But here's one of our maps of Jerusalem. And these are always reconstructions. We're reconstructing what we think we know. This is this little section down here is what was called the City of David. I don't know if you can see it here, but what happens is this goes up a hill. There's a steep rise. Well, this water gate, or maybe here, I don't know on the model, it's somewhere right along in here, but it's parallel to this valley gate on the other side. And then see, you have this river running through the Kidron Valley. Right here, we think there's like a plaza area. It's like the wall bifurcates, it splits, and there's an inner wall here. It may be that they were all gathered around in there, and then those towers that were set up for the reading would have been somewhere around here. I really don't think this is to scale, because you see little people up here, and I don't think anybody was ever that big, not even Goliath. Anyway, These are the holy days. And so all of this activity happening in the 7th month is important. They're making their link, they're making their connection back to the formation of God's people with Moses and with the Exodus. Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priestly scribe, and the Levites who were imparting understanding to the people said to all of them, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." For all the people had been weeping when they heard the words of the law. He said to them, "Go and eat delicacies and drink sweet drinks and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." A few things from this passage. First of all, it shows us that celebration is appropriate. Celebration is an appropriate response to God's favor. And that you can celebrate, and it can be reverent, but you can enjoy these things. They have something to celebrate. They've been returned to their land. God has given them great gifts. When you give your children, when you give your family gifts, what do you want them to do with it? You want them to celebrate it. You want them to enjoy the things that you have given them. That gives you joy to see that. Nehemiah and Ezra and the Levites are telling the people, don't weep thinking that you've lost. Rejoice because you've heard the truth. Now you can do this. You've heard what you're supposed to be, and you're here now. The time for weeping was back in Babylon. The time for weeping was back in the capital city of Persia. So now they celebrate these festivals. They go deeper into the law, and as they read it, they realize, okay, here's the things we're supposed to do. And they recover these festivals. And festivals and rituals give us identity. I love over the last 17 years, and sitting in meetings with the elders, and I think it was usually Bob Knoll that brought this up, and Bob would say, you look through Scripture and you see that Israel had these feast days. They had this calendar. Why? Because remembering these holy things of God on a schedule in tradition, what it does is it keeps us connected to God's Word. That's a very good observation. And I think that we in some ways need to have our understanding of that. Now, am I saying that we need to go and recover Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? No, not necessarily. It wouldn't have the same meaning. But I think there are ways that we can set times and dates among us, and then sometimes we have the first day of the week. The first day of the week is always an important time for us to come and to gather together. We've kept that tradition since the days of the apostles, and we recognize that this is the Lord's day. We've given Him this day. We come together around the Lord's Supper. All of these things have meaning, and when you put it in its larger context, the meaning just expands. And you realize that on this Lord's Day, for example, there will be brothers and sisters that we don't even know around the world celebrating this same meal with us. And you realize that people who've gone before us will be doing this, and people who come after us will be doing this. I do think that every time there's a baptism, we're connected to something. It becomes a kind of a holy day. It becomes a holy observation. We've made baptism very individual, and in many ways it is an individual choice. But in other ways, it's also a time for the community to affirm new birth, new life in Jesus Christ. So, they have these holy days. They're becoming the people that God always intended them to be. The purpose behind these festivals is so that they would remember things. They need a lot of that remembrance. When they come back into the land, a lot of those festivals like Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, and the Festival of the Booths. The Festival of the Booths was an agricultural festival. And what you're remembering in that is you're remembering that God gives us the good things that we need to survive and to live. When you live that close to the land, you know that the land can go south on you quickly. Okay? I mean, you can have your crop fails, people starve. Somebody was telling me, and I don't know all the research on this, but this is just, might be, some of you out there will know the story behind this. I think it was originally my grandfather that told me this, that one of the reasons why we have chickens all over northwest Arkansas is because the apples all got killed by a blight up in that area. So, it would have been apples if the blight hadn't killed it. But that happens in a lot of places. You hear about that, where you have to switch your crop because something goes bad, so you have to change to something else. So when you live that close to the land, you depend. Now, in our day and age, we make do. In ancient times, you starve and die. So you want to make sure that you remember that these things are a gift from God. Now, pagans would try to control the gods to get what they want. But believers remember the God who provides and gives good gifts. God takes the initiative. Pagan gods respond to our magic. That's going to come up in the sermon today, too. We'll just stick around for that. Now Nehemiah wants to bring them into covenant. He wants to bring them into resettlement. So he sets a covenant among the people. Nehemiah 9, he says, because of all this, we're entering into a binding covenant in written form. Our leaders, our Levites, and our priests have affixed their names on the sealed document. This is it's a covenant. It's a kind of a summit decision that what they're going to do is they're going to find people who will resettle Jerusalem. In chapter 9, they go back over the story of God's people. They remember how God settled them in the land, how their ancestors rebelled against God, how God took them out of the land, and now in His graciousness He's brought them back. And so now they want to covenant to do the right thing. You read through chapter 9, it's a confession of sin. It's a affirmation of God. In 9:32, it says, now therefore our God, the great God, mighty and awesome, who keeps His covenant of love, do not let all this hardship seem trifling in your eyes. The hardship that has come upon us, on our kings and leaders, and on our priests and prophets, on our ancestors and all your people, from the days of the kings of Assyria until now. In all that has happened to us, you have remained righteous. You have acted faithfully, while we acted wickedly. They're saying we're not going to do that again. And they link it back to Assyria, which goes up to the northern tribes. I mean, they could have said, hey, that's not us. We're the people in the south. We're the people in Judah. We stood up when all of those nations got, caved in. But they don't. They connect it to that. That's one history. That's one story. That's what they share. So they create this binding covenant. And you go through chapter 10, and it describes some of the things that they will do. These are things that they commit to. They are going to stay religiously pure. They're going to keep the covenants. They're going to be very careful not to make the mistakes of the past. This is their amends. This is their atonement. They know the things that got them into this fix, into this mess as a people in the first place. Now they want to make sure that they do the things that are the opposite of that and keep them out of that kind of situation. They establish some economic decisions, and then they start to, in chapter 11, let's read 11, 1 through 2 here on the screen. The leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem, and while the rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of every 10 to settle in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the other 9 remained in the other cities. The people who gave their blessing on all the men who volunteered to settle in Jerusalem. So it's sort of a lottery. They create a lottery, and wherever these people are living in these settlements across the district of Judah, 1 out of every 10 moves to Jerusalem, and everybody agrees to it. And they say, this is good. This is how we want it. So you go through chapter 11, and you have the descendants of Judah and of Benjamin. You have the priests and the Levites and the gatekeepers, which is kind of a new addition in the days of Nehemiah. We're familiar with the priests and the Levites, but now we have the gatekeepers. Makes sense. You've built this gate. You'd better have people take care of it. Otherwise, it's no good. Nehemiah's thinking ahead. Now these people move to the city. And by the way, it's so important that you have this populated, not just for an economy, but what happens in Jerusalem. You have your governor there. It's not exactly like the king when David was there, but there's another building there that was there before the wall that Zerubbabel and Joshua rebuilt, and that's the temple. And if you have the temple there, then that's where you're supposed to observe some very important things in your relationship with God. They keep that connected. So that temple there is very important for all of the people. Makes sense then if we're living off in, say, Jericho or something like that, or Bethlehem, that, yeah, we're going to send somebody off to Jerusalem, a settling family, and say, yeah, you need to be there and you need to keep that thing going, because we out here need that temple doing what only the temple can do, because that's where we as people are observing our commitment and our relationship to the Lord. I mean, every year they're going to have the Passover, and something's going to happen there in the temple. You're going to have the Day of Atonement in the temple. I mean, this is not a portable religion at this point, okay? This is a religion that's based very much centered on the observances that happen in a physical temple in Jerusalem. So they repopulate it. And then there's celebration. When you get all of this together, they celebrate this good turn of events. They get all of these people together, and again, you have more records of names. And in 1227, they dedicate the wall of Jerusalem. The Levites were sought out from where they lived. They're brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving, with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The musicians were brought together from the region around Jerusalem. This is a big festival that they put on. And the villages of the Netophathites from Beth Gilgal and from the area of Geba and Asmaveth. And so you have all these people coming. Let's see, picking up in verse 40. The two choirs that gave thanks then took their places in the house of God, and so did I, together with half the officials as well as the priests. The choirs sang under the direction of Jezreiah, and on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away. This is not an average Sunday worship service, where everybody's mumbling through the song. They've got something to celebrate. They are giving thanks to God. They go on in this dedication to dedicate storerooms. Storerooms are for the contributions. Contributions in those days, it's not digital cash. It's not even paper money or metal money entirely. It's stuff. It's food. And so if you contribute food, you've got to have a place to store it. You got to have a root cellar. You got to have somewhere to put this stuff. The temple actually serves the purpose of being a kind of giant pantry in some ways. And so you have places where you can store this stuff. In verse 44 of chapter 12, he says, "At that time men were appointed to be in charge of the storerooms for the contributions, the first fruits, the tithes." Not all tithes are money. "From the fields around the towns where they were to bring the storerooms, the portions required by the law for the priests and the Levites, for Judah was pleased with the ministering priests and Levites." You've also got to take care of the ones who spend their time doing what they do in the temple. That's part of the law of Moses. It's how you do it. So the Levites performed the service of their God and the service of purification, as did also the musicians and the gatekeepers, according to the commands of David and his son Solomon. So, in the days of Zerubbabel and of Nehemiah, all Israel contributed the daily portions for the musicians and the gatekeepers, and they also set aside the portion for the other Levites, and the Levites set aside the portion for the descendants of Aaron. They have come a long way. They've come a long way from being just like all the other nations, where the higher-ups tax the people into poverty, okay? Where the elites like Nehemiah, who would have been the governors, the ruling class, they would have had that commission from the Persian king that they could tax everybody in the land and they could take a cut of it. It's just like the old tax collector in the New Testament that we read about, who collects taxes for Rome, but he takes a cut for himself, and then he kicks up a little bit of that to the Roman rulers. Nehemiah put an end to that. He says, "This is not how we're going to do it. We're going to let everybody thrive, and then we're going to all give a tenth. We're all going to give a small portion. And if everybody can give, then everybody's taken care of." It's a great lesson on the power of genuine contribution, the way that it's meant to be, where everybody is participating in this freely, where everybody is giving charitably. And so they've come a long way, and they've got this kind of a setup. They're celebrating it. So now we go back to our timeline. All of this happens, this drama with Nehemiah, in about 12 years. Artaxerxes rules from 465 until 424 BC. He has a good long reign, nearly 40 years. And, actually 41 years. And he's the Persian emperor for a long time. He is the Persian emperor that gives Ezra the commission to go back to Jerusalem in 458. And then what is it then? It would be like 13 years later, Nehemiah takes off on his mission. And then in 433, Nehemiah returns to Persia. He had told Artaxerxes that he would be back. Artaxerxes has let his cupbearer, a trusted official, go take care of this business for his homeland, for his people. And when we read that Nehemiah turned things back over to his brother, Nehemiah is doing a very George Washington thing there. He's saying, I don't have to be the governor forever. He takes the governor role as a servant role. And he turns things over to his brother. And he says, you can have good leadership. You can have people who do this. Just do what I do. And then I'm going back to my duties in Susa. But it does him good. And you think about that. He set all this up. And he doesn't even get to remain and enjoy the benefits of it because he's going back to meet his other obligations to the king. Turns things over to his brother. In chapter 13, we get a little bit of a sequel. It's an epilogue, at least. Sometime after 433, when he returns, it's not specific, but sometime after his departure from Jerusalem, he comes back. And when he comes back, he doesn't like what he sees. While Nehemiah was away, and here's your map of those surrounding groups. You see Judah there in the lime green right here. Here's Jerusalem across the Jordan River here. That's where Tobiah lives, and Ammon up here is where Sanballat, the Horonite, lived, and he's not mentioned a whole lot anymore, but these are the Samaritans, and they've been there a lot longer than the Judeans. But Nehemiah returns to Artaxerxes in 433, and then we read in chapter 13 that there is a priest named Eliashib who is put in charge of those storerooms that we talked about. Now, he is closely associated with Tobiah. And you'll see, depending on what English translation you have, it'll say he was closely associated with, he was this. We would say he's kin to Tobiah, okay? He's kinfolk. He married into Tobiah's family. We get a little closer description in here later of how he's connected. But Tobiah of Ammon across the river right there then is connected to this Eliashib. And so Tobiah, seeing a good thing going, wants in on it. So he works out a deal with Eliashib where he gets a storehouse. He says, you know all those storerooms where people are bringing their contribution? Think I could have one of those? Now, if Tobiah has a storeroom, who's going to get what's contributed to it? Well, that'd be a guy, name of Tobiah. So he sees a good deal here. He's got a little thing going, you know. It's a little enterprise. He's got a little action going on over at the temple. I mean, why not? He's thinking we're all one. So Eliashib gives Tobiah a storeroom. In verse 6 of 13, Nehemiah writes, "While all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon," that's 433, and you might be wondering, wait, king of Babylon? Yeah, king of Babylon. He is king of Babylon. He's king of a lot more. Well, then why didn't he say king of kings? Why didn't he say king of Persia? There might be a reason. Babylon brings up a lot of lessons that they don't seem to be learning. The reason why they ended up in Babylon in the first place back in 597. 586. He said, in the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, I had returned to the king, and sometimes later I asked his permission, and I came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God. I was greatly displeased. And so I arrived in Jerusalem, learned this, and I was angry. This is Peterson's version. I want to read from this because it gets the emotion of it. I was angry, really angry, and I threw everything in the room out into the street, all of Tobiah's stuff. Don't you love it? I mean, this is really like a family dispute. It's like the landlord comes back and it's like, this guy, I can't believe what he's done to the place. Box all of his stuff up, throw it out in the street, get him out of here. And then I ordered that they ceremonially cleanse the room. Only then did I put the worship vessels of the temple of God along with the grain offerings and the incense back in the storehouse. But we can't have this. We can't have Tobiah in there doing. Tobiah does not honor God. He's going to bring in pagan religion. This has got to be cleansed. So Nehemiah shows up after being away for a while. He says that this can't be. Now I wonder, does this story remind you of another story with the temple? It should. It should. We'll get to that in a moment. During those days, while I was back in Judah, I also noticed that the people treaded wine presses, brought in sacks of grain, loaded up their donkeys on the Sabbath. They're working on the Sabbath. They brought wine, grapes, figs, all kinds of stuff to sell on the Sabbath. So I spoke up and I warned them about selling food on that day. Tyrians, those are the people from Tyre and Sidon. Tyrians living there brought in fish and whatever else, selling it to Judeans in Jerusalem, mind you, on the Sabbath. They are decaying after everything Nehemiah had helped them do, after everything they had done to get rededicated and so they're decaying. They're getting sloppy. They're forgetting the Sabbath. You might be thinking, well, can't they just kind of do virtual Sabbath at home, or something like that? Yeah, you're missing the point. This is not just the Sabbath and going to church. This is a core piece of their identity. This goes to the commandments. The reason why you do no work on the Sabbath is not because you have to go to some religious service. What were the people when they were in Egypt? They were slaves. You know how many days off a week a slave gets? 0. You work slaves until they die. The purpose behind the Sabbath was to say to the people of God, you will never be slaves again unless you enslave yourself and forget this Sabbath. And that's exactly what they're doing here. So Nehemiah confronts the leaders of Judah. What's going on here? This evil, profaning the Sabbath. Isn't this exactly what your ancestors did? And because of it, didn't God bring down on us in this city all this misery? And here you are adding to it, accumulating more wrath on Jerusalem by profaning the Sabbath. As the gates of Jerusalem were darkened by the shadows of the approaching Sabbath, I ordered the doors shut and not to be opened until the Sabbath was over. I placed some of my servants at the gates to make sure nothing to be sold would get in on the Sabbath day. Traders and dealers in various goods camped outside the gates once or twice, but I took them to task and I said, "You have no business camping out here by the wall. If I find you here again, I will bring my hand down on you." You know, there's a few Bible verses that just catch your attention and you're like, whoa, is that really in the Bible? Yeah, it is. There it is. I told the college students last week, I said, you think of all those things that you see embroidered on, a cross stitch or a needlepoint or, something that comes in a little gift. You have all those kind verses like Philippians 4:13, I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me. There's a few of those that you'll never see, like in Ecclesiastes, meaningless, everything is meaningless. I was going to say that one of them that you'll never see is this one. If I find you here again, I'll bring my hand down on you. Guess what? Somebody actually made a t-shirt of this. If you do so again, I will lay my hands on you. Nehemiah 13:21. Boy, that's a gift. I won't be upset if I get one of those for Christmas. But I think, again, we can misunderstand this, and this is not a license for violence. No way is it a license for violence. But Nehemiah is so upset because they are about to lose what he's worked for. You can see here he says he realized, another situation he realizes is that they're getting sloppy again with their calling to be God's people. I realized that some of the men of Judah had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. These are even the most distant of all their relations. Furthermore, half the children spoke the language of Ashdod or some other people and could not speak the language of Judah at all. They're forgetting who they are. I mean, if they can't speak the language of Judah, how are they going to understand the Word of God? So I confronted them and I called curses down on them. I beat some of them. I pulled out their hair. I made them swear in the name of God that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. Wasn't this exactly what led King Solomon of Israel into sin? I demanded. Now, is Nehemiah justified in smacking them around like this? I think the real question is, are we justified in smacking people around like this because we think that we're religiously right? No, we're not. Nehemiah is treating the leaders of Israel like children. That's the point. He is treating them like children because what they are doing is so dangerous. He wants to get their attention. I said this reminds us of stories, and we always come back to that story of Jesus in the temple. If you make it up to the Sight and Sound Theater in Branson this year or next year, you see the new show they've got, which is Jesus. There's the scene where Jesus throws the moneylenders out of the temple. And the way they do it is pretty interesting. It's actually done in slow motion. It goes into this slow motion thing, so pay attention when that happens. But Jesus enters in there. Now, a lot of people like to go for this sort of redneck Jesus theology where Jesus gets in there and he starts smacking people around with a whip. There's no indication that he struck people with that, but he might have used it to drive the animals out. Still in all, he is upset, and he's upset by what he sees because it's injustice. The difference in the Jesus story and the Nehemiah story is Nehemiah sees the influence of outside people coming in and corrupting the people who should be observing God's ways in the temple. Jesus sees his own people doing that to his own people. And that's what's so upsetting. And then he quotes from Jeremiah when he says, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it into a den of robbers." And there's always a problem with this tangible temple and how it can be co-opted into the purposes of even good religious people. So the last chapter of Nehemiah is a bit of a warning that after everything Nehemiah did, it didn't take very long for them to get it wrong. You have to focus on the person, on the God that is behind that temple. And Nehemiah closes out his diary, his book, by asking God to remember the things he did. Remember me with favor, my God. Because he knows it's not about what he did. It's about what God has done, and what he has done is to be faithful. Jesus understood that the temple or any form of religion cannot become a system for gaming God or rigging the world for our purposes. That it's supposed to be a house of prayer. Prayer is a situation where we trust and we lean on God and we wait on God. Thievery is a way of making our own way that hurts others. Well, thank you for your attention to this class. Hope it does you some good, and I appreciate the opportunity to teach this. And let's gather again for worship at 10:30. All right. Thank you.